How to draw poses in contrapposto style. In this video, I'll be talking about the applications of the contrapposto asymmetrical body stance in drawing. We'll take a look at various poses to see how the idea of contrapposto works in action. Let's start by looking at this pose. This figure shows the pose from behind, but let's see how all of the complementary parts come together. First off are the shoulders. They're tilted on this angle, and the bottom would swing on a contrary angle to the shoulder line. Then take a look at her spinal axis. The spinal cord is especially important when drawing poses from behind, as you can see from the line going down the center of the back. If you draw such that people can clearly tell where their spine is, it makes it easier to identify your pose from the back. Let's look at the dynamics of the arms and legs. The arms are simply drawn like this, but when we look at the legs, we see her body weight is shifted onto her left leg. These joints here should be drawn with care, as they help indicate where her center of gravity lies. I'll move on to the next one. This pose depicts her front on as if walking straight towards us. Let's look closer at her shoulders and hips. The shoulders, hips, and spinal cord are just about the same as a normal standing pose. But since she's walking, she's got one foot thrown out ahead, with her arms swinging in tandem. The axes of the shoulders and hips are particularly important when drawing regular walking pose from the front. You'll notice that if you observe yourself walking in front of a mirror, but as you walk, your weight transfer will alternate between each foot as it's swinging between your hips. It's easy to tell the positioning of the arms and legs when the figure is side on, but when drawing from the front, it's important to add in the swaying motion of the hips and shoulders to help with those parts where you think, I just can't seem to capture that sense of distance. When observing others or yourself, take special note of the shoulder and hip movements. I'll explain the next two poses together. Let's first take a look at the axes for the hips and shoulders, and then the spine and the legs. And also the arms. I want to introduce some feminine poses here. In these instances, the small of her back constricts, or her waist narrows in to compensate for when the character makes large motions such that her body weight is shifted. Keep in mind that the very feminine looking poses are the ones in which the character's center of gravity seems unstable. In doing so, it's really important that the axes for her shoulders and hips also shift quite a lot, as they will help accentuate the femininity of her stance and create a contrapposto-esque movement. Going back to the pose from before, it doesn't look like she's making any big movements, judging by the inclination of her hips and shoulders. However, emphasizing the contrast between the angle of those axes is an important factor when you want to draw a lively feminine pose. Again, if we look at even more dynamic poses, we can see that the same angling of the shoulders and hips is really vital. The curve of her spine has a really nice arch here. Even if we turn to poses where the character has one leg raised, his shoulders and pelvic axis are also important points to note. His collarbone, hips, and spine are slightly twisted, so you can see this slight rotation of his spine reflected in his torso. The motion of the hips and shoulders can really augment that sense of flexibility in your drawings, so keep these torso movements in mind for when you feel your character is lacking in a bit of substance. It's also important to take note of where and how exactly the torso twists. So if you want to try recreating this pose here, it always helps to maintain that awareness of how the movements of the hips and collarbones are constrained. I'll now explain a bit more about poses from a completed illustration, starting with this one here. Let's draw in the rough composition of the pose on top. First is the head, which faces this way. Then I'll just draw in the neck and torso. Right now, I'm drawing just a plain chest outline because we can always change the size of her chest later. It's also important for me to think about where and which parts of these poses are overlapping, since they're partly on top of each other. So when thinking about the obscured parts, for instance, you should still try to visualize how her left arm would be placed. Even planning these parts out will make you a master in drawing perspective. Now I'll explain the makeup of their body poses. These are the shoulder and hip axes for the girl on the right, and then for the girl on the left. This time, I wanted to really put fitting clothes on them, so this is why I chose these poses using nice, neat guiding lines. You don't really see people pulling this kind of pose in everyday life, but you'll often see models in magazines or fashion shows that twist their back and hips in the very same way. Fundamentally, this picture kind of ignores gravity, so you don't really need to remember where their center of gravity is, but you still do need to construct a realistic, natural-looking figure in order to put more life into your character. So that's the end of the lesson on how to draw poses in contrapposto style. Thanks for watching.